I saved a dying wolf pup in the middle of a snowstorm, thinking I'd never see him again. But a year later, his entire pack came to my doorstep, and what they did still makes my hands shake. You won't believe how far gratitude can travel through the wild. When I heard the howl outside my window, my breath caught, because I knew it wasn't an accident. The sound sliced through the winter night, pure and mournful, rolling across the frozen pines and shattering the silence I'd kept like armor since retiring to this cabin. It was not the casual chorus of distant wolves. It was a single voice, right there in the dark, aimed like an arrow at my heart. A year ago, almost to the day, I had followed another cry through thigh-deep snow. I remember the moonlight turning the forest silver, the air so cold it burned my throat. I thought I'd find a wounded deer, maybe finish its suffering. Instead, curled in a hollow of drifted needles, I found a wolf pup no larger than a farmhouse cat, his fur stiff with ice, his breath a frail plume. One eye was glued shut, the other flickered on me in quiet panic, as if already weighing whether a human could be trusted with his last minutes. I should have walked away. That's what you do in real wilderness. Let nature decide. But his ribs fluttered like trapped birds, and something in me cracked open. I scooped him into my coat, pressed him to my chest, and felt the savage tremor of his tiny heart stutter against mine. Back in the cabin, I fed the stove until it roared. I melted snow, added deer broth, dribbled the warmth across his tongue. He shivered, whimpered, but stayed. Hour after hour, I held him to my skin, trading my heat for his life. Dawn found us both awake, exhausted, and alive. I called him Sir, soft like a whisper, but carrying the rush of the river that thundered beyond the ridge. Sir. He blinked at the sound, testing it in his own throat, a pup-sized growl that made me laugh for the first time in years. What happened next still rattles me. He didn't fight my touch. He didn't snap or bare his teeth. He curled at my feet, head on my boot, as though I were pack. Once, when the fire popped and I started, he pressed his nose to my ankle, steadying me. A creature born for tooth and claw, offering comfort to an old man who'd forgotten what connection felt like. And those eyes, those impossible amber eyes, held me. He looked at me as if he knew I had given him a second life. Every time he met my gaze, the cabin walls seemed to breathe, as if the forest itself leaned in to listen. 3 days later, a thaw set in. Sir wobbled to the door and sniffed the gusts slipping through the gaps. The wild was calling him back. My gut twisted. I opened the door anyway. He padded into the white glare, paused, and glanced back. 1 heartbeat, 2. Then he vanished among the birches, silent as smoke. I stood there long after he'd gone, the winds licking my cheeks raw. I told myself a truth rough and simple. Wild things return to the wild, and if you love them, you let them. I stacked wood, mended traps, patched the roof. Weeks passed. Spring puddles swallowed the snow, summer thunder shook the peaks. Autumn bled gold across the valley, and with winter's first blizzard, I finally believed the story was finished. Tonight the wind carries that lone howl, and the air inside the cabin feels suddenly thin. I set down my tin mug, fingers tingling, and ease toward the frosted window. Outside, the night is a curtain of swirling white. Another howl, closer now, deeper. My lungs cinch tight. I unlatch the door. The storm claws at me, filling my beard with ice. Shadows pool at the tree line, vague shapes slipping between trunks. Then a figure steps into the clearing, lit only by the weak glow from my lamp. A full-grown wolf, broad-chested, scar crisscrossing one ear. Snow dusts his muzzle like frost on iron. He holds my stare, unblinking. Sir. Recognition slams through me so hard my knees nearly buckle. He is huge now, regal, every inch the wilderness I once dared cradle in my coat. Yet his eyes, those same liquid embers, burn with something gentle, something I cannot name without trembling. He takes one measured step forward. I feel the primal thread between us pull taut, ancient, unspoken, unbreakable. Behind him, more shapes emerge, fanning out like ghosts at the edge of lamplight. A whole pack, silent, waiting. The clearing pulses with potential, mercy or mayhem, I can't tell. Sir tilts his head, and for an instant, I'm back in that cabin a year ago, the firelight dancing, his fragile heart fluttering beneath my palm. My throat closes. I want to speak his name, but the wind steals my voice. He lowers himself to the snow, front legs folded, a gesture of impossible trust. Around us, the pack mirrors him, bellies to ice, eyes shining. They are not here to hunt. They are here for something else, something that makes the skin on my arms prickle with awe. The storm quiets, as if even the wind wants to listen. I take one step toward him. He doesn't flinch. Snow crunches under my boot, loud as thunder in the hush. My breath clouds between us, trembling. He watches me, steady, patient. In that gaze I read echoes of nights shared by ancestral fires, when humans and wolves learn to inch closer without fear. A memory older than language stirs in my blood, and I understand. Gratitude has brought him back. Whatever bond was forged in that desperate dawn has not only survived, it has grown, carried on the paws of a predator who refuses to forget. I swallow hard, heart rattling my ribs. Tears prick my eyes, hot against the cold. My hand lifts, slow as dawn, reaching into the space between us. The pack holds its collective breath. Sur's ears dip, his tail brushes the snow. He rises, grace in motion, and closes the gap until his muzzle hovers inches from my shaking fingers. Then he does the unthinkable. He leans in and presses his forehead to my palm. Heat floods my skin. The world tilts. For one staggering moment, I am inside his heartbeat again, hearing the silent language of the wild say, "Thank you." He steps back. The pack flows to its feet. And just like that, they melt into the swirling dark, leaving only paw prints and a single stunned man standing in their wake. I thought that was the end, that the chapter we shared had finally closed. But I could never have imagined how violently that single act of mercy would return to me, how it would shatter everything I believed about the boundary between man and beast and carve its truth into my life forever. When the wind started screaming across my roof tonight, I figured it was another of those angry January blizzards that strip bark off the spruces and make grown men talk to their stoves. I threw an extra log on the fire and waited for the gale to settle. It didn't. Instead, a long, rising howl threaded through the roar, clear, close, deliberate. My lungs locked so hard, I tasted iron. Snow hammered the windows in frantic fists. Shadows slid between the tree trunks, half-made figures caught by the lantern glow. I grabbed the Winchester from its hooks. Out here you respect hunger. A starving pack will test any door, any heartbeat. I thumbed the safety, pressed my back to the wall, and listened. Another howl answered, then another, weaving a chorus that wrapped the cabin like tightening wire. I stepped onto the porch. The storm slapped me blind, snow swirling sideways, wind punching every seam of my coat. Visibility was 3 paces at best, yet the sense of eyes was everywhere. I racked a shell. "Easy now," I muttered, words whisked away before I heard them myself. Movement at the tree line, gray bodies materializing, dissolving, materializing again, never fully there until they wanted to be. 7, 8, maybe more. They formed a semicircle, heads low, shoulders loaded with patient muscle. But they didn't advance. They simply stood, as though the night itself had arranged them into an audience, and I was the lone actor who'd forgotten his lines. My knuckles went numb against the stock. Wolves do not hesitate when hunger drives them, yet these moved like soldiers, waiting on a signal. I aimed into the snow just wide of the led animal, finger tense, every instinct shouting, "Warn them!" But something colder than the wind told me to hold. The furthest right shape eased forward, 1 step, snow to the knee, silent as falling ash. Then another. The others stayed rooted, as if a wire ran through them. The advancing wolf lifted his head. A gust parted the curtain of white for an instant, and a lantern beam caught his eyes, gold, familiar, impossibly calm. When I saw those eyes, my hands trembled. It was him, my Sir. The rifle sagged. A year in the wild had poured iron into his frame. He moved like river current, thick and unstoppable. But his gaze was the same ember that had once watched me spoon broth into a mouth too small for hope. He halted 5 feet from the porch, letting the wind cover him in crystals until he looked carved from the storm itself. "Sir," I whispered. His ears twitched at the name, as if it still fit. Behind him the pack waited, tails low, muzzles frost-rimmed. No growls, no paws pawing the earth, only a hush so deep it muffled the howl of the gale. They weren't here to test wood or bone. They were here for something I couldn't read yet, a language older than tracks and teeth. I lowered the rifle muzzle into the drift. Sur's nose lifted, drawing in my scent like a memory. He took another step, slow, deliberate. My pulse hammered against my temples, part terror, part awe. Every survival lesson I'd drilled into my bones screamed distance. Every human ache for meaning tugged me closer. Snow surged across the porch boards. He reached the first step, sat, and looked up at me the way he had looked from my boot that first night, steady, searching, unafraid. The pack adjusted but didn't break formation. I realized they mirrored me, facing their point wolf in a half-circle of suspense. A flake melted on Sur's lashes. He blinked, and I saw it. Not hunger, not challenge, but intent. Purpose so clear it felt like words inside my head. "We remember." My throat closed. I wanted to step down, to bridge the last sliver of space, and press my palm to that familiar brow, but cold common sense glued my boots. The wind shifted. Sur's ears flicked. He turned halfway, a silent order rippling through fur and muscle. The pack pivoted as one body, snow flying from tails, and began to fade back into the timber. Sir lingered, eyes on mine, until the dark almost swallowed him. Then he rose, gave a single breath of a howl, softer than before, almost intimate, and melted into the storm. For a full minute I stood frozen, rifle useless, heart sprinting. The yard was empty, yet electricity still sparked in the air, the afterimage of something holy. Wolves at the door, and not a drop of blood spilt. Gratitude, not hunger. A message delivered, though I could barely grasp its shape. I let the Winchester hang limp and stepped back into the cabin. The fire hissed, like it too had been holding its breath. I bolted the door, though the gesture felt silly now, and pressed my palm to the wood where Sur's eyes had met mine. It pulsed with heat, as if the touch had seared through. Maybe that was the end of it. Maybe the storm carried them miles away even now, and the world would tilt back to ordinary come dawn. I almost let myself believe it. But deep in the forest, a single note rose, short, bright, unmistakable, and I knew the night was not finished with me yet. The next night the storm calmed, but something heavier than weather pressed against the walls. I slept in broken fragments, one ear tuned to the forest. When a faint thud shook the porch before dawn, I sat upright. No wind throws weight like that. Lantern in hand, rifle slung but forgotten, I cracked the door. Snow drifted in moon-pale waves, and there, half in shadow, stood Sir. Frost glittered on his shoulders. His breath rose in thick plumes. Between his jaws he dragged a dark, massive shape. At first my fear called it a man. Then my reason called it a bear. But when he heaved it fully into the light, I saw slender legs and hooves splayed like fallen antlers. A deer. Fresh slain, no rigor yet, heat still seeping into the night air. Blood glistened, but did not spill. The wound at the throat was precise, almost surgical. He nudged the body forward until it rested against my porch steps, then backed away one slow pace. The pack ghosted from the trees, arranging themselves in that same quiet half-moon, sentinels carved from dusk. Not a growl, not a snap of teeth. They watched me the way parishioners watch a priest lift a chalice. My pulse thudded in my ears. Gifts do not exist in the vocabulary of predators. Yet here lay a winter's fortune of meat, delivered without demand, steam coiled from the deer's hide. I could smell the iron of blood, sharp as a struck nail. It would feed me for weeks, maybe months, if I salted and smoked fast enough. But survival wasn't what turned my knees weak. It was the intent. Sir lowered his head. For one heartbeat, I expected him to reclaim the prize, to remind me of the natural order. Instead, he planted his chest in the snow, forelegs stretched, tail still. He stepped back and lay in the snow, as if he was waiting for me to understand. A tremor ran the length of my arms. Lantern light flickered over his eyes, and I caught that same ember of recognition, the echo of a pup's trust. He was saying, "Take it. We remember." The pack's silent presence pressed the message deeper. This was no whim. This was ceremony. I eased down the steps, boots crunching softly. The wolves held their ground, muscles taut but unmoving. Kneeling by the deer, I laid a gloved hand on its neck, still warm. I whispered thanks to the animal, to the pack, to whatever wild covenant had bound us. My breath clouded in the hush. Sir's ears twitched. He rose, but only to sit, regal and steady, like a scout reporting victory. Wind worried my coat, otherwise the night was heartbeat quiet. I reached toward him, palm out. He didn't close the gap, didn't need to. The trust between us stretched invisible, humming. Minutes passed, an eternity suspended on the edge of instinct, before Sir gave a single nod of his great head. As one, the pack turned. Snow sprayed under lean paws, and they slipped into the trees, shadows swallowing shadows until only the silver scars of their tracks remained. I stood alone with the deer, lantern hissing. My chest swelled with a feeling I hadn't worn since boyhood wonder, something larger than gratitude, smaller than worship, balanced exactly between. I hauled the carcass onto the porch, muscles straining, and laid it where the cold night air could keep it from spoiling till dawn. Inside, the cabin felt too small for what had happened, the rafters too low to hold the enormity of that wordless exchange. I poured a finger of whiskey, watching it tremble in the glass like liquid ember. Outside, star-blown silence settled over the clearing, peaceful as an old hymn. I thought that was all, a gift, a memory, gratitude, but it was only the beginning. Even as I leaned against the doorframe, sense of wonder thawing into exhausted calm, a prickling certainty crawled my spine. The bond forged in a single act of mercy had not finished writing its terms. Somewhere beyond the tree line, paws were still moving, plans older than fire still unfolding, and I, an aging hermit with shaking hands and a brimming heart, had just been invited deeper into a story the wild was not done telling. The deer was still hanging in salted quarters when dusk fell the next day, but the clearing felt emptied of breath, as though the very snow missed the weight of paws. Not a single track marred the yard. Wind had combed it clean. I almost convinced myself the night before was a fevered dream spun from cabin fever and too much whiskey. Almost. Because after moonrise the howling began again. It started low, distant rolls that shivered the window glass, then resolved into that same solitary voice that knew my name without speaking it. My chest tightened. I set down my knife, wiped brine from my hands, and stepped onto the porch with the lantern. The beam skated across blue drifts, caught on ice-sheen trunks, and finally snared a shape halfway between house and forest. A dark mound lay on the snow, huge, motionless. My breath fogged the glass chimney as I inched closer. The smell hit first, musk and earth and something old as thunder. Bear. A whole bearskin, ragged at the edges, skull cleaned, paws intact, laid out like a blanket at my threshold. I stared so hard my vision blurred. Someone, no, some thing, had stripped this grizzly clean and carried the hide miles through waist-deep powder only to set it here, perfect as an altar cloth. Behind the hide, wolves emerged one by one, fanning into that quiet semicircle. Sur led them, head high, nose wet with starlight. The wind worried the long guard hairs on his shoulders, but he held steady, waiting. My knees shook so badly I gripped the doorframe. They were bringing me gifts as if I were something more than a man. I knelt, heart banging. The bearskin's claws gleamed dull silver. The scent of cedar smoke still clung to the fur. This Bruin had wintered close. A trophy any hunter would mount, yet here it was, surrendered without claws. Sur chuffed once, soft. The pack's eyes glittered like embers caught in frost. I understood. They had paid their debt in meat. Now they brought tribute, in danger conquered. Protection offered back to its giver. My throat burned. I rose, crossed to the meat pole, and carved 2 heavy strips of venison. Hands trembling, I laid them on the snow midway between porch and wolves, then stepped back, palms open. My pulse roared in my ears. Every survival rule said, never feed predators. But trust had already broken those walls. For a breath, the wolves held still. Then a young gray, scar over his muzzle, paced forward, seized a strip, and retreated without a whisper of teeth. Another followed, and another, each lifting the meat like sacred bread, never once brushing my boots. Sur came last. He paused over the remaining strip, glanced at me, and in that glance I felt the circle close. Gift for gift, life for life. He took the venison, wheeled, and padded to the line of trees. The pack melted after him, silent ripples fading into black pine. I exhaled so long my ribs ached. The yard lay deserted again, but awe hummed in every shadow. I dragged the bearskin onto the porch, fingers sinking into coarse fur, and spread it before the door like a sentry. The claws clicked on the boards, a warning to anything that meant harm, a promise to anything that meant grace. Inside, the cabin smelled of iron and spruce sap. I added a log to the stove, watched sparks spiral. My hands still quivered, not from cold, but from the reverence of being chosen for a covenant I hadn't known existed. If it had happened only once, I could have called it coincidence. A hungry winter, a lucky kill, an animal's odd whim. But twice? 2 nights, 2 offerings, each heavier with meaning than the last. This was no accident. It was a language, patient and relentless, carving itself into my days. The wild was speaking, and I was only beginning to learn the alphabet. I rolled the bearskin tight, set it by the hearth, and sat listening to the hush pressed against the windows. Somewhere beyond those panes paws tread snow with purpose only they understood. And somewhere inside my chest, an echo answered, ready, terrified, and aching for whatever message tomorrow night might deliver. I barely slept the following 24 hours. Every creak of the rafters, every moan of the wind, felt like paws returning. By dusk, I'd paced trenches in the cabin floorboards and reheated coffee I never drank. The bearskin lay by the hearth like a silent oath, its dark eye sockets trained on the door. Snow began to fall again, soft this time, lazy spirals beneath a bruised sky. I stepped onto the porch, lantern raised, and waited. The hush was so deep I could hear my pulse rattling the globe glass. Then, as midnight tipped, shadows rippled at the tree line and resolved into wolf shapes gliding over the drifts. Third visit. They spread out in the familiar half-moon, but tonight, no deer dragged behind them, no shaggy hide. Empty-mouthed, they looked almost casual, yet the air thrummed with purpose. Sur moved ahead, fur haloed with snow dust, and this time he did not stop 10 paces out. He came all the way to the bottom step, close enough that I could see frost crystallized on his whiskers. Something small glinted between his teeth. My fingers tightened on the porch post. A bone? A shard of antler? He lifted his muzzle, met my eyes, and eased the object onto the top plank with delicate precision. Then he took one step back and sank into the snow, forelegs stretched, amber gaze steady. I knelt, breath trembling white. The thing lay half buried in powder, dull metal winking like a tiny coin. I brushed snow aside, and recognition hit so hard my vision splintered. A brass hunting button, embossed with an old-style stag's head, worn smooth by years of campfire heat, exactly the kind that once lined my winter coat. I'd lost one during that frantic night a year ago, kneeling in the drift while Sir's pup body spasmed against the cold. I'd never found it, figured it swallowed by spring melt or a magpie's nest. Yet here it was, delivered by the very life I had rescued. He laid it at my feet and just watched. Tears ran down my cheeks. Not the hot tears of pain, but the stunned, helpless kind that come when the world proves it remembers more than you dared hope. The button weighed less than a feather, but it carried every shiver, every whispered prayer from that night in my cabin when death and life wrestled on my hearth. Wind combed Sir's fur, his ears flicked, but he held the pose, waiting for me to see the whole of it. Wolves don't hoard trinkets, they don't track lost things through seasons. Yet somewhere out there, he had nosed through moss and mud until this scrap of brass surfaced, then carried it miles to set it before me like a seal on an invisible treaty. I reached toward him, slow, open palm. He didn't flinch. My hand hovered inches from his muzzle, heat mingling with his breath until snow melted on my sleeve. A low rumble vibrated his chest, not threat, but something like contentment. I pressed the button against my heart, the metal cold and biting. For a heartbeat I heard them both, the pulse under my ribs and the pulse in his throat, two rhythms sharing the same winter air. Behind Sir, the pack stayed motionless, eyes glinting approval. We hung there in our fragile bridge of silence until the lantern guttered, reminding me the wick was nearly spent. When I looked back, Sir rose, dipped his head once, formal, almost regal, and drifted to his kin. The wolves wheeled as one and melted into the dark, leaving nothing but tracks that filled even as I watched. Inside the cabin the button burned in my fist, an ember of the past returned by jaws of the present. I stitched it back onto the empty thread of my coat, hands shaking so badly the needle bit my thumb. Blood dotted the fabric, tiny, bright, and somehow that felt right, a signature in my own ink. I set the coat over the chair, turned down the lantern, and sat listening to the hush that followed the wolves' departure. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It thrummed with a promise that the line between us would keep thinning, visit by visit, gift by gift, until maybe nothing stood between man and beast except a single heartbeat of understanding. If you feel this is more than a story, subscribe. Nature keeps her secrets, but sometimes she shares them, and you won't want to miss what she whispers next. I woke to a hush so absolute it felt manufactured, as if the forest had cupped its hands around my cabin and told every creature to hold its breath. Dawn had not yet cracked, but the snow outside shimmered faint blue, bright enough to reveal movement. I shrugged into my coat, slid the button Sir had returned tight between my fingers, and stepped onto the porch. No rifle, no lantern, nothing between my heartbeat and the cold. They were already there. Wolves, more than I'd ever counted, surrounded the cabin in a wide ring, bodies low, heads bowed, paws placed with ceremonial care. Moonlight caught their backs like a crown of ice. They moved counterclockwise, silent, deliberate, as if tracing an invisible circle of salt to bind spirit to earth. Each animal passed the front steps, eyes down, then continued the arc, never breaking pace, never lifting a snout. The sound was a faint swish of fur through powder, a slow sweep of devotion. Fear fluttered in my throat, old instinct warning that many predators moving as one can only mean ambush. Yet awe crashed over it in the same breath. Predators don't perform rituals. Rituals belong to minds that remember. And these wolves remembered everything. One by one they filed past, each leaving a single paw print clearer than a signature. My breath plumed white. The night exhaled frost. I didn't dare step down, afraid to break whatever fragile sanctity bound them to this moment. Instead, I pressed a hand flat to my sternum, feeling the brass button burn against skin. When the last wolf reached the far side of the clearing, the circle closed like a completed sentence. They halted. Snow settled on their backs, unshaken. A pause stretched. 10 heartbeats, maybe 20. Then the pack turned as one and began to flow toward the trees, their departure as fluid as their arrival, silence knitting itself back together behind them. All except one. Sir stood halfway between porch and forest, tail low, ears canted forward, gaze fixed on me. He neither advanced nor retreated, just watched. The distance was close enough that I could see the gentle ripple of his breathing, the tiny quiver in his whiskers. My chest tightened. I took a tentative step off the porch, boots sighing into soft drifts. Another step. He didn't move. 2 strides away now, close enough to feel the heat bleeding from his body into the frigid air. The moon caught the faint scar on his ear, a white line etched by survival. My hand lifted, palm outward. He lowered his head, but not in submission, more like acknowledgement, a calm acceptance that we occupied this sliver of night together by deliberate choice. Fear throbbed in me, raw knowledge that a single snap of that powerful jaw could break bone, but reverence rose with equal force. 2 opposing currents collided, sending shivers skittering up my spine. I swallowed, unsure which tide would win. Sir's ears flicked back at some distant rustle, his pack waiting beyond sight. For a breath he looked torn, front paw lifting as if to follow. Then he planted it, turned his eyes on me one last time, and in those golden depths I read a sentence older than language. Remember. Without a sound he pivoted, loped toward the tree line, and disappeared into the birches. Snow shook loose from branches in a hushed applause. The clearing emptied, the hush dissolving into ordinary winter night. I stood alone under the paling moon, knees weak, lungs burning with the cold and with something hotter, gratitude so fierce it almost hurt. Around the cabin the perfect circle of paw prints glowed, a ring of stories stamped into snow that would not last past the next wind and yet would outlive me all the same. Back inside, I leaned against the closed door, letting my pulse slow, letting the stove's heat lick sensation back into fingers. My coat felt heavier now, as if the single returned button anchored the whole garment to a different reality. I traced its cool surface, remembering the tiny jaws that once clamped it tight, the trembling heart I had held to my own. I thought that was the end, a farewell, a benediction, a closing of the wild's ledger, but I was wrong. A week slid by in white silence. I chopped wood, salted the last of the venison, tried to stitch my nerves back together. By day 3 I felt steady enough to hike the south ridge for fresh snares. Fresh powder lay smooth as parchment, but halfway up the trail I noticed twin sets of paw prints ghosting my boot tracks. Wolf, full grown, pacing my stride but never crossing it. I knelt, pressed a glove into one print. The edges were crisp, minutes old. When I rose, a hush settled over the trees as if someone had set down a glass bell. The next morning, the same thing. My outbound prints followed by theirs, always one pace to the left, one pace behind. Day after day, the pattern repeated. They never approached, never showed a whisker, but the message felt loud as a shout, "We are here." At night, when the stove snapped and the wind moaned, I pictured gray sentinels drifting along the timberline, matching my heartbeat to their silent patrol. On the 5th day, I strapped on snowshoes and cut deeper than usual, hunting rabbit sign near a frozen creek. The sky was a dull pewter bowl, snow shadows long and blue. That's when the woods went dead quiet. No chickadee, no pine squirrel chatter, just a hush thick enough to smother breath. My skin crawled. I pivoted, and a young black bear shouldered out from behind a spruce, less than 20 feet away. A spring cub grown reckless over winter, ribs showing under a mangy coat, hunger glowing hot in its eyes. It huffed, jaw popping, and lunged a half step. I raised my arms, shouted, tried to look bigger, but my voice hit the stillness like a dull axe. No rifle today, too heavy for trap checking. The bear dropped to all fours, claws rasping ice. One more bluff, and it would commit. Then the tree line exploded. Wolves poured from every direction, snow geysering under their paws, 5, 6, maybe more, fanning into a moving wall between me and the bear. Sir led them, shoulders rippling, teeth bared in a low, rolling snarl that vibrated the air. The bear reared, swatted claws at nothing, but the wolves closed ranks, snapping inches from its flank, forcing it backward. I could smell wet fur and musk, hear the clack of ivory on ivory. The bear's bravado bled out fast. It wheeled, crashed through alder scrub, and thundered up the slope, showering bark in its wake. Silence rushed back, broken only by my ragged breathing. The wolves turned as one to face me. No growls now, only watchful eyes. They had been guarding me. They knew I was one of theirs. The realization struck so hard, my legs nearly folded. Sir padded forward, stopped just out of arm's reach, and looked at me the way a trail partner checks for injury, steady, unblinking, waiting for a sign. I managed a shaky nod. His ears flicked, satisfied. With a soft woof he spun, and the pack melted into the trees, snow settling behind them like a closing curtain. I sank to my knees, palms buried in the cold, lungs burning with a cocktail of terror and reverence. For minutes I just listened, to nothing, to everything. Somewhere far off, a jay screamed, life seeped back into the forest, and I understood the prints that had mirrored my steps all week. An escort, a shield I hadn't earned, yet somehow possessed. Back at the cabin I hung my coat, the brass button warm against my heartbeat, and replayed the scene 1,000 times. Each memory loop tightened the bond until it felt woven into bone. The wild had wrapped a circle around me, paws instead of fences, and within that circle, I was safer than any hunter's bullet could promise. If your heart is racing right now, you understand. Subscribe. Nature is still speaking, and the next whisper might change everything. Spring announced itself the way it always does out here, quiet at first. A loosening drip under the eaves, a darker stain along the southern flank of every spruce, the faintest scent of thawed earth rising through crusted snow. I patched traps, mended fence posts, and tried to live my life as though it hadn't been repurposed by wolves. But every melt crack in the ice, every distant snap of branches, still reached me as a language I was learning to speak. When the sun finally stood higher than the ridge at noon, I felt a tug as unmistakable as hunger. The ravine, the place where a year and some months ago I'd knelt in wet needles and pressed a dying pup to my chest. I strapped on snowshoes, there was still 2 feet of brittle white in the shade, and set out before dawn, following the creek upstream, breath turning to pure silver in the chill. The forest had changed coats, conifers slick with meltwater, alders showing fragile buds like pinpricks of green flame. Yet the path knew me. I reached the ravine by mid-morning, sunlight spilling over the lip in molten sheets. My shadow lay long on the drifted floor, pointing to the exact hollow where Sir had shivered out his first night of second life. And there, right where his ribs once pressed against frozen earth, lay a single bone. Worn gray by seasons, polished smooth at both ends, it resembled a flute carved by ancient hands. Not scavenged, not scattered, but placed, aligned north-south halfway between moss and air, as deliberate as a signature. I crouched, heart thumping. Wolf femur. Too thick for a deer, too pristine for a leftover kill. If time could write a letter, this was its pen laid on the page. I reached out, then froze at a sound that made marrow vibrate. A lone howl, high and slow, rolled across the treetops behind me. Not the rallying cry of a hunt or the chorus of a pack. This was singular, lingering, the voice of memory itself. It climbed, held, then broke into silence that felt bigger than the sky. I turned but saw only trees, their black trunks striped with snowmelt. No flicker of gray fur, no flash of amber eyes, just the echo reverberating inside my chest. I eased down to sit beside the bone. Black soil peaked where my weight collapsed the crust, the scent of thaw sharp and living. My gloves came off. Fingers shook as they wrapped around the relic, warm from sunlight, lighter than I expected. A year ago I'd carried flesh and heartbeat. Now I cupped what remained when the touchable leaves. I couldn't tell whose bone it had been, one of the pack, a distant ancestor, maybe a wolf who'd never known my name. Yet the intention was clear. Here is our truth, carried through winter to your hands. Keep it. Remember. My eyes blurred. I leaned against the bank, snow seeping through wool, and let the weight of everything descend. The first night in the cabin, Sir's pulse fluttering under my palm, the deer laid at my door, the bearskin, the button, the silent circle around my home, wolves ghosting my trail to shield me from claws and teeth, a wilderness that somehow decided I deserved guardianship I hadn't earned. Tears came without heat, clean as meltwater. They ran into my beard and froze at the edges, tiny prisms on gray hair. I wasn't weeping for sorrow. I was weeping for the impossible arithmetic of kindness, for the notion that a mercy given once can ripple, gathering momentum until the world itself bends differently around you. Snowmelt trickled somewhere beneath the crust, the forest breathing in a cadence older than language. I don't know how long I sat. The sun climbed, shadows shrank. The bone grew warm enough to feel like living flesh. At last I tucked it inside my coat, right against the brass buttons Sir had returned, letting them touch, metal and bone, memory and promise, stitched now to the beat of my heart. Silence lingered, but it had changed timbre, no longer empty, but resonant. The hush after a choir finishes its last note. I rose, brushed slush from my knees, and looked back across the ravine one final time. No movement, no eyes in the brush. Yet I felt watched, not with hunger, but with a patience that trusted me to understand. On the hike home, I kept finding tracks paralleling mine, a day old, maybe two, melting at the edges, yet unmistakably wolf. Each time the trail veered into thicker trees, the prints mirrored my choice, as though an unseen compass aligned us. I didn't quicken my pace. I didn't raise my guard. The forest and I were moving in the same pulse now. Near dusk, when my cabin roof finally came into view, smoke curling lazy from the stovepipe, icicles weeping in sunlit tears, I realized I was ready to live among people again, but never apart from this covenant. The bone would stay on my mantle, the button stitched permanent, the bearskin at the door. And when the night winds carried howls across the valley, I would answer in the only way a man can, by remembering. I stepped onto the porch, opened the door, and the warm breath of cedar and iron welcomed me home. Inside I set the bone on the mantelpiece, its pale curve glowing in firelight like a crescent moon. It looked right there, equal parts relic and promise. My throat tightened once more, but I managed a shaky smile. I had been the witness. Now I was also the keeper. If you too have met wonder in the wild, write it below. Let the world know it still happens. If you also believe animals remember kindness, type, animals remember good.
When Lotta sank her teeth into Sarah's pajama sleeve and growled, Sarah's breath caught, because she realized, the dog wasn't merely frightened. She knew. That night, the old farmhouse lay under a waning moon, its weathered timbers yawning in the autumn wind. Inside, the lamps were all off, save for a single oil lantern in the kitchen, where Sarah had been reading by its flickering light. Hours earlier, she'd welcomed Lotta, a stray with mournful eyes and ragged fur, into her home, offering dinner and a soft blanket. Since then, the dog had been restless, but nothing like this. It began around 11, when Lotta rose from her bed and padded to the hearth with her ears pricked. Sarah looked up from her book as the dog sat, statue still, staring into the dark corner behind the sofa. She called softly, "Lotta." The dog's tail thumped once, hard, then she rose and slunk along the wall, nose to the ground. Sarah's heart fluttered. She marked the clock, 11:15. Snow was weeks away, and tonight was clear, but Lotta's hackles rose at each gust, rattling the shutters. Every time Sarah stood, Lotta would whirl, hackles bristling, hackles that felt icy beneath Sarah's soothing hand. "What is it?" Sarah whispered, following her into the hallway. Lotta didn't bark. Instead, she prowled, ears swiveling, eyes wide and wary. Sarah paused at the foot of the stairs. One step creaked under her weight. Lotta jumped, hackles high, and lunged forward. Sarah clutched the banister. "All right, girl," she murmured, offering reassurance she hardly felt. Lotta dropped low, tail stiff, and trotted toward the kitchen door. Sarah hesitated, she wasn't sure if she should follow. But Lotta's deep whine pulled her along. They reached the kitchen, where the lantern's glow painted the walls a tired gold. Lotta nosed at the base of the plaster, then sat back on her haunches, body rigid. Sarah approached, hand outstretched, and felt a tremor of foreboding. The air smelled faintly of old wood and something more, a metallic tang like embers yet to burn. "I think you're just nervous," Sarah told her. Nothing more. She knelt and stroked Lotta's shoulder. "It's okay. Go back to bed." Lotta's lips curled in a low snarl. Sarah froze. The dog's teeth showed white, a warning more urgent than any bark. In all the weeks they'd been together, Lotta had never snarled. Sarah swallowed hard. "Okay," she said, voice unsteady, rising to her feet. "Let's go." She led Lotta toward the stairs, but the dog yanked, tugging Sarah's sleeve until she stumbled forward. A hollow click echoed from behind the stove. Sarah spun, lantern held high. The space between stove and wall had darkened, as if a shadow had thickened there. Sarah stepped closer, heart pounding. She thought of the drafts that sometimes snuck beneath the floorboards, of mice scuttling in the walls. She told herself it was nothing, just her imagination. "I thought you were just nervous," she repeated in a trembling whisper. She gave Lotta an encouraging pat, then pressed on the stove side. The metal was warm, too warm for a draft. Before Sarah could process it, a soft pop split the air. It came from the back wall, where the kitchen cabinet adjoined the living room. Sarah's lantern trembled, the flame flickered and guttered. Lotta leapt back, frozen on the spot, ears flat now, eyes locked on that very wall. Sarah's skin prickled. She took a step forward, then another pop, harder this time, like a gunshot muffled by distance. The plaster cracked, hairline fractures spidering outward. Sarah's pulse thundered. She swallowed. What on earth? A third crack, and a faint glow bloomed between the boards. Sarah stumbled backward, lantern clattering to the floor. Flames flickered in that narrow seam before she even registered the heat. In a heartbeat, the crack widened. Smoke rolled into the room, thick and choking. The lantern's light vanished, swallowed by darkness. Sarah gasped, rubbing tears from her eyes. Lotta barked once, fierce and insistent, as the wall surrendered to fire. Flames licked through the gap, hungry tongues hungrily consuming wood and plaster alike. Sarah coughed, stumbling toward the door. She grabbed Lotta's collar and hauled her outside onto the back porch. The night air felt shockingly cool against Sarah's face as she turned to watch the inferno swallow her kitchen. Behind her, Lotta pressed close, body taut, eyes bright with urgency. Sarah's breath came in heaving sobs. She sank to her knees, covering her face with trembling hands. Lotta nudged Sarah's arm, whining softly. Sarah looked up, caught the dog's gaze, and realized the truth. Lotta hadn't been spooked by shadows or storms. She'd sensed the spark before it bloomed, felt the tremor before the wall gave way. Smoke curled around the porch rails, and Sarah's chest tightened. She wrapped an arm around the trembling dog, pressing into Lotta's warmth. Embers drifted past like angry fireflies, and sirens wailed in the distance. Sarah pressed her cheek to Lotta's head, tears streaming. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew." But even as the fire roared behind them, Sarah felt a spark of wonder that outshone her panic. She began to understand that the world, this wild, beating world, held secrets beyond human knowing. And Lotta, with her uncanny warning, had opened that door. Smoke-darkened sky overhead, Sarah hugged Lotta fiercely, breath still catching. The dog leaned into her embrace, steady and sure. Together, they watched the flames, and Sarah wondered what other miracles lay hidden in the night. Sarah scarcely registered the chill of the night air as Lotta's paw pressed against her calf, urging her toward the back door. The acrid tang of smoke clawed at her throat, each inhale a searing reminder that the house behind her was no longer safe. Lotta's eyes, their usual warmth replaced by a fierce urgency, locked onto Sarah's, and with gentle but insistent tugs on her sleeve, the dog guided her into the cold night. Panic pounded in Sarah's chest. She coughed, pressing a trembling hand over her mouth. Through bleary eyes she saw the kitchen window glow orange, flames lapping at the frame like hungry tongues. Lotta turned once, backlit by the fire, and barked sharply, then nudged Sarah again until they stumbled out onto the grass. For a breathless moment they stood together on the dew-damp lawn, Lotta's muzzle lifted to the roar of the blaze. Sarah sank to her knees, heart hammering so violently she feared it might tear free. She wrapped her arms around Lotta's neck, pressing her face into the dog's scorched fur. "I thought we were done," she rasped, her voice raw with tears. "I thought you'd let me out for good." Lotta pressed closer, ears flat against her skull, eyes solemn. Sarah patted her back, voice trembling with gratitude and dread. The cool air stung her lungs, but it was relief compared to the choking smoke inside. Just as Sarah dared to imagine salvation, Lotta jerked free and bounded back toward the kitchen door, her bark slicing through the night. Sarah bolted upright, horror constricting her throat. "No, Lotta," she screamed, stumbling after her companion. The grass whipped at her ankles as she raced across the yard. Her mind spun with terror, she thought she was about to lose Lotta forever. Inside, the heat hit Sarah like a physical force. She coughed violently, eyes watering as she forced herself forward. The floorboards groaned under the onslaught of flame, and each step burned her feet through her slippers. She skidded past the smoking doorway where the fire had taken hold, hands clawing at the walls for balance. Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps, panic rising stronger than her will. "Lotta," she choked, fear tangling with helplessness, surely the dog couldn't survive this inferno. Then the world outside snapped back into view, Lotta emerged clutching something in her jaws. Sarah lurched forward, heart pounding so wildly she thought it might burst free of her ribs. As the dog crossed the threshold into the night, Sarah recognized the limp shape dangling from her teeth, Luna, the barn cat she had rescued the summer before, now heavy and singed, but alive. Sarah fell to her knees beside her dog and gently pried Luna from Lotta's mouth. She couldn't stop herself from crying out in relief, "Oh, thank God, you found her." Luna's fur was scorched in places, and her breathing came in shallow, terrified rasps. Gently, Sarah cradled the cat against her chest. Lotta sat back on her haunches, eyes shining with a strange pride and urgency. Sarah pressed Luna into her arms, stroking the cat's head as tears streamed down her cheeks. The world seemed to tilt. Had she just witnessed a miracle? Lotta, a single stray dog, had risked everything to bring Luna to safety. She placed him into my arms and went back into the fire. The words came unbidden to Sarah's lips, and she realized they captured the impossible truth. With that act, Lotta had proven she was no ordinary animal. She had a purpose far beyond instinct. Sarah stood, her arms wrapped protectively around Luna, and looked at Lotta. The dog's muzzle was flecked with ash, and her ears drooped slightly as if she had spent all her strength on that one rescue. Yet the moment their eyes met, Lotta's tail gave a determined wag. Sarah's heart clenched. "I won't let you go back in," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. She reached out and slipped a makeshift leash, her sweater sleeve, around Lotta's collar. The dog didn't protest. She pressed against Sarah's side, as though accepting this fragile truce. Behind them, the old farmhouse groaned and cracked, its timbers fed to the hungry flames. Embers drifted skyward like glowing specks of sorrow and wonder. Sarah pressed Luna more tightly to her chest, feeling the cat's rapid heartbeat against her palm, a heartbeat she had thought she'd lost. She leaned down and kissed Lotta's head. "Thank you," she murmured. "Thank you for saving her." The dog looked up, eyes glimmering with a wisdom that stretched beyond Sarah's understanding. In that moment, Sarah knew nothing would ever be the same. The bond between them had become something sacred, something forged in fire. And though the night was far from over, Sarah felt a fierce flame of courage ignite within her, a courage born from witnessing the impossible, guided by a dog who knew more about love and sacrifice than any human could ever hope to understand. Emily's voice tore through the acrid haze as she dashed forward, arms outstretched. "Lotta, come back," she shouted, but the roar of the blaze swallowed her plea. The fire's heat pulsed against her skin like a living thing, and every inhale stung her lungs with bitter smoke. Inside the kitchen, where bright orange flames licked the ceiling beams and charred the once cozy wallpaper, Lotta moved with single-minded purpose. Sarah hesitated at the threshold, torn between desperation and fear. She should stay back. She had already seen the dog's miraculous rescues tonight, but something deep in her chest propelled her forward. "Lotta," she called again, voice cracking. The dog paused at the foot of the embered stairs, head lowered, ears pricked. Sarah inched closer, heart pounding so hard she feared it might shatter her ribs. For a heartbeat, Sarah believed Lotta might heed her call. Relief began to warm her chest, until the dog darted upward, vanishing into the smoke-choked gloom. Sarah's breath caught, and she stumbled back, tears stinging her eyes. "No, please, don't go," she sobbed, clutching at the doorframe as another ceiling beam groaned and dropped a cascade of sparks to the floor. She knew she should retreat, should wait outside, but she couldn't stand still. Sarah forced herself inside, each step measured and trembling. The world had narrowed to two things, the roar of the fire and Lotta's silhouette drifting deeper into danger. Minutes, or perhaps seconds, later, Lotta re-emerged, dragging behind her a battered metal cage. Sarah froze, chest heaving, as the dog crossed the threshold and thrust the cage toward her. Inside the cage, wings fluttered against the bars, painting smudges of color on the ashen metal. Sarah's heart seized. It was Captain, the parrot her daughter had named for his confident strut and jaunty whistle. Sarah knelt, coughing, and pried open the cage door with shaking fingers. Captain's emerald and gold plumage was flecked with soot, but his bright eye met Sarah's gaze with undimmed trust. "Oh, Captain," Sarah whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. She scooped the parrot into her arms, pressing him against her chest. His heart hammered beneath her palm, frantic but alive. For a moment, Sarah thought the night's horrors had ended. Lotta had saved the dog, the cat, and now the parrot. They were all safe. She pressed a grateful hand to Lotta's head, voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, my brave girl. You've brought everyone home." Lotta's tail thumped once, then she exhaled a soft whine that echoed Sarah's relief. Sarah exhaled, forcing her body to relax after the adrenaline's grip. In her exhausted mind, she replayed the impossible sequence, one life after another, plucked from death's jaws by a single animal who seemed to know by name whom she must save. "I thought," Sarah murmured, voice trembling on the edge of disbelief, "I thought that was it. I thought we were done." But Lotta's head snapped up, ears swiveling. Her gaze shot past Sarah's shoulder, fixated on something deeper within the burning walls. Sarah followed the line of her sight, heart twisting. Another scream of timber collapsing punctuated the air, and Sarah stiffened with renewed dread. Lotta turned back to the door, hackles bristling, as though challenging Sarah to stop her. Sarah swallowed hard, battling the fierce urge to hold the dog close and never let go. The rational part of her mind screamed that Lotta had done enough, that pushing further could kill her. Yet she knew, as surely as she stood surrounded by embers and smoke, that Lotta's mission was not yet complete. "I can't let you," Sarah whispered, stepping between the dog and the inferno. She reached down and fastened her sweater sleeve around Lotta's collar, a makeshift leash born of desperation. "Please, Lotta. No more." Lotta's eyes burned with an intensity that made Sarah's pulse stutter. For a moment, the dog braced against Sarah's hand, muscles tense like coiled steel. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. Was this the moment Lotta would finally surrender, or would she break free and run back into the fire? Sarah closed her eyes and clung to Lotta's collar, waiting. The world shook with the fire's wrath, and every second felt infinite. Sarah thought, asterisk on this, it must end. She can't go back in, asterisk the certainty rang in her mind, heavy and dark. But then Lotta leaned forward, planting her paws firmly on the porch's edge. She lifted her head and gave a single, resolute bark, an echo of courage that cut through Sarah's fear. The dog's eyes bore into Sarah's, as if seeking permission and promising return. Then, without another glance, Lotta slipped the makeshift leash free and bounded into the smoke once more. Sarah sank to the wooden boards of the porch, tears spilling freely now. She pressed her forehead to her knees and wrapped her arms around her trembling body. "I thought that was the end," she thought, heart fractured between relief and horror. "I thought she'd saved us all, but she's still out there." In the hush between her sobs, Sarah could hear Lotta's distant barks, fierce and unwavering. And as the fire's glow pulsed through the night, she whispered into the smoke-filled air, "Go on, then. Finish what you've started." Sarah looked up, clutching Captain close, and watched the dancing shadows on the edge of the inferno. Hope and dread twisted together in her chest as she waited for her remarkable companion to return once again, and bring home the next miracle. Sarah pressed her palms to her cheeks as she watched the flames devour the roofline. Lotta had dashed inside again, and now more time slipped by than any rescue before. Each second bloomed into an ache of dread in Sarah's chest. "Lotta," she shrieked into the smoke-choked air, voice raw. "Lotta, come back, please." But the only answer was the crackle of collapsing beams and the hiss of flame. Sarah's knees buckled, and she sank to the scorched earth, hands clawing at dirt. Her heart pounded so fiercely she thought it might burst. She imagined Lotta lost among the inferno's twisting corridors, trapped under a falling beam, suffocated by smoke. Terror clawed at Sarah's throat. She staggered to her feet, stumbling toward the porch. "Lotta." Her voice wavered, tears cutting tracks through ash on her cheeks. "Don't leave me. Please." Sarah pounded the railing with shaking fists, each blow echoing her frantic hope. Outside, embers drifted like angry fireflies. The night sky was a billowing canvas of orange and gray. Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps, she was sure she would pass out from dread. Time felt unspooling. 10 seconds, 20, then 30. The fire roared behind her, but Sarah's world narrowed to one unrelenting thought, she's gone. I've lost her, I thought this was it, Sarah whispered, voice cracking. I thought Lotta had given everything. She closed her eyes, bracing herself for the crushing finality of loss. The flames flared, and Sarah let the smoke fill her lungs, waiting to collapse in grief. Then, a soft thud on the grass. Sarah's eyes flew open. A shape emerged from the fire's glow, moving toward her in slow, determined steps. Lotta stumbled forward, fur singed in patches, paws slick with ash. Clamped gently in her jaws was a ragged, barnyard hen, Matilda, the feeble old chicken Sarah had long since assumed died of cold weeks ago. Sarah froze, breath caught in her throat. The hen's feathers were singed and matted, but she clucked weakly as Lotta set her down at Sarah's feet. The dog then backed away, head low but eyes alive with triumph. Sarah sank to her knees, tears spilling unchecked. "Matilda, my Matilda," she gasped. She knelt, trembling fingers reaching for the bird. "I thought you were gone. I thought you'd never come home." She pressed the hen to her chest, feeling its rapid heartbeat against her palm. Matilda's claws scrabbled weakly against Sarah's shirt as though urging life back into her ancient bones. Sarah stroked the chicken's ruffled feathers, voice quivering. "Where did you find her? Where was she hiding?" Smoke curled around the barn's charred timbers behind them. Sarah lurched to her feet and peered through the haze toward the old lean-to. "She was in the corner, under the broken stall door," Sarah whispered, realization dawning. "I looked there yesterday and thought she was gone for good." Sarah sank to the ground, cradling Matilda and looking up at Lotta with awe. "She saved even what I had long since forgotten," Sarah murmured, the words tasting of wonder and reverence. Lotta pressed her muzzle against Sarah's knee, then lifted her paw as if seeking comfort. Sarah wrapped her arms around the dog, pressing her cheek to Lotta's warm fur. The two of them sat amid fallen embers and dying smoke, holding the hen between them like a fragile miracle. Above, the sky glowed with the fire's wrath. Around them, the world had cracked open and revealed something primordial, a bond unbroken by fear, a devotion that reached into darkness and summoned hope. Sarah's tears continued to fall, but this time they carried gratitude instead of despair. As the distant wail of sirens grew nearer, Sarah whispered into the night, "You did it, Lotta. You saved us all, you even saved what I'd forgotten." And in the hush that followed, the hush of lives spared and miracles witnessed, Sarah knew the night had changed her forever. She and Lotta rose together, Lotta stiff but unbowed, Sarah determined. Ahead lay more dangers, more unknown rescues, but neither would face them alone. Sarah's heart hammered as Lotta burst from the house one last time, her silhouette framed by collapsing timbers and choking smoke. The dog's stride was determined, but something in her gait seemed off, her pace faltered, and her right front paw caught on a fallen board. Lotta stumbled, pitching forward in a spray of sparks, her body crashing onto the scorched threshold. Sarah's scream ripped from her throat. "No, Lotta, stay there," she cried, abandoning caution as she sprinted across the lawn. The heat struck her like a wave, her lungs burned when she drew in a breath. Ignoring the roar of flames, she dove toward the fallen dog, dropping to her knees in the ashen grass. Lotta lay on her side, chest heaving with ragged breaths. Burns blackened her fur, and her eyes, those bright, wise eyes, flickered open and closed like embers. Sarah's world contracted to the sight of her beloved companion so close to death's door. She dropped to her belly, pressing her hands against Lotta's flank. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Lotta, please. I can't lose you." Smoke stung Sarah's eyes as she pressed her cheek to Lotta's head. The dog lifted her muzzle weakly, each inhale a struggle. Sarah's tears burned her face, mingling with soot. She wrapped trembling arms around Lotta's body, drawing her close. "You've done enough," she sobbed. "You don't have to go back. You can stop now." The house groaned behind them, floors collapsing, walls surrendering to the fire. Sarah pressed her palm to Lotta's chest, feeling the frantic thrum of a beating heart. Gratitude and horror warred inside her, gratitude that Lotta had saved every single family member, and horror that this final rescue might have been her last. Sarah stared at the dog's twisted form, convinced she would never move again. "I thought she'd get up," Sarah thought, every fiber of her being certain that this was the end. "I thought she was gone." She closed her eyes, bracing for that unbearable emptiness. But then, a subtle tremor under her hand. Sarah's eyes flew open. Lotta's chest rose again, slower but unmistakable. Sarah's breath hitched. She knelt, pressing both hands to Lotta's side, willing warmth and life back into her battered companion. "Come on, girl," Sarah whispered, voice thick with tears. "Get up for me. Please." Lotta's eyelids fluttered. She groaned softly, as though staggering to her feet took every ounce of her remaining strength. Sarah's heart clenched with a fierce hope. She reached out, brushing Lotta's muzzle with her fingers. The dog's tongue flicked weakly, an ember of her old spirit. Encouraged, Sarah guided Lotta into a sitting position against her chest. She held the dog's head aloft, tears streaming as she gazed into those familiar eyes. "Thank you," she choked. "Thank you for coming back." Lotta collapsed against Sarah's shoulder, panting. Each breath seemed a triumph over the raging fire around them. Sarah gently wiped ash from the dog's fur, her fingers trembling. "You're so brave," she murmured. "So brave and so kind." Sarah blinked through her tears as Lotta's trembling eased. Then, as if sensing Sarah's relief, the dog lifted her head and pressed her damp nose against Sarah's cheek. A soft lick brushed Sarah's temple, warm and reassuring. Sarah exhaled a sob of wonder and joy. "Lotta," she whispered, though her words felt too small for the moment. The dog's gentle lick spoke more than any speech could, a promise of loyalty, a testament of love that transcended fear and flame. Behind them, the farmhouse roared its final protests, beams collapsing in thunderous crashes. Sarah pressed Lotta against her side, drawing strength from the dog's living warmth. Flames and ashes swirled around in a deadly ballet, but in Sarah's arms, the world stilled to that single, sacred moment. She leaned down and kissed Lotta's forehead, her tears falling on singed fur. "You saved us all," Sarah breathed. "You saved everyone in that house. And you came back to me." Lotta's tail thumped softly against Sarah's knee, a gentle heartbeat of reassurance. Sarah closed her eyes, savoring the pulse of life beneath her hand. The fire might consume the world behind them, but here, in the glow of unspoken gratitude, Sarah found a miracle more enduring than any flame. And as the last embers of panic melted into awe, Sarah whispered into the smoke-choked night, "We'll heal together, you and I. I promise." Sarah sank to the dew-damp grass, the last embers of panic still dancing around her heart. The fire behind them crackled into distant memory as she turned her gaze back to Lotta. Moonlight and ash painted the dog's coat in shades of silver and charcoal. Lotta lay beside her, ears flicked forward, eyes shining, not with fear or pain, but with an ancient wisdom that seemed to stretch back through time. Sarah's chest tightened. She reached out a tentative hand, brushing a singed stray hair from Lotta's brow. The dog lifted her head and met Sarah's touch with quiet dignity, as if asking, "Are you all right?" In that stillness, Sarah felt the weight of everything they had endured. The howling heat, the suffocating smoke, the desperate rescues of every creature she loved. She had thought she was the savior, offering a home to a stray, giving warmth and food. But as she looked into Lotta's calm, knowing eyes, Sarah realized the truth, I did not save her. It was she who saved us. I was merely the necessary link in her chain of miracles, Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. She pressed her palm to Lotta's flank, feeling the soft rise and fall of the dog's breath. Each pulse beneath her fingers was a testament to courage beyond instinct, a testament to a bond that defied explanation. I thought I took you in, Sarah whispered, voice trembling. But you were already here for a reason. The dog blinked slowly, as if in agreement. Sarah thought of the night they first met, Lotta shivering on the roadside, eyes pleading. She had knelt and coaxed the dog into her car, believing she was rescuing a frightened stray. Yet now Sarah understood, she came to me because she knew. Sarah inhaled the cool night air, tasting both relief and wonder. She sat up, drawing Lotta close so their shoulders pressed together. Embers drifted skyward, tiny sparks against a canopy of stars. Every flicker reminded Sarah of the many lives Lotta had risked herself to save, Luna the cat, Captain the parrot, Matilda the hen, and each trembling heartbeat that lingered because of Lotta's bravery. In the hush, Sarah spoke again, her voice soft but certain. You chose me to be part of this, she said. You chose me to protect you, too. Lotta rested her head against Sarah's leg, eyes half closed in contentment. The dog's steady presence felt like a blessing, a benediction etched in fur and devotion. Sarah wrapped her arms around Lotta's neck, pressing her cheek to the dog's warm ear. All my life, I never believed in fate, Sarah admitted. But tonight, I saw it unfold. She paused, collecting her thoughts. I didn't rescue you. You rescued everyone. You rescued me. And I was exactly where I needed to be. The words hung in the still air, carrying the weight of a truth Sarah had once thought impossible. Around them, the world had been consumed by fire, but here, in the fragile circle of moonlight and ash, something unbreakable had been forged. Sarah rose to her feet, easing Lotta up with her. The dog stood unsteadily but resolute, tail brushing Sarah's calf in quiet solidarity. Together, they faced the smoldering remains of the farmhouse. What was left was charred and broken, yet somehow beautiful, a monument to survival, to miracles, to the indomitable spirit of one extraordinary dog. Sarah slipped her arm through Lotta's collar strap, leaning close to murmur, that night, I understood, I did not take you in, you came to me because you knew. Lotta lifted her head, ears pricked once more, as though confirming Sarah's realization. Then, with a soft wag of her tail, she led Sarah away from the ruins and into the night's quiet promise. As they walked side by side, Sarah felt her heart swell with gratitude. The bond between them had shifted from mere companionship to something far deeper, an unspoken covenant sealed in smoke and flame. She knew their lives would never be ordinary again. And as the first glimmer of dawn painted the horizon, Sarah whispered to the rising light, thank you, Lotta. For everything. Lotta paused, turning her gaze to meet Sarah's, and in that profound exchange, Sarah understood the greatest miracle of all. Sometimes, it is the smallest, most unexpected souls who carry the greatest wisdom, and lead us home. Dawn's pale light crept over the blackened skeleton of the farmhouse, turning charcoal beams to ashen gray. The world felt hushed, as if the night's fury had exhaled its last breath and left everything trembling in its wake. In the yard, neighbors gathered at the roped-off perimeter, faces etched with disbelief and wonder, murmuring to one another as they stared at what remained of the home that had once stood so proud on Maple Ridge Road. Sarah stood in the center of the small crowd, arms wrapped tightly around herself against the morning chill. Her hair was still flecked with soot, and her clothes clung damply to her skin. She watched as the firefighters extinguished the last stubborn embers, sparks dancing in the mist like tiny ghosts. But even as the water hissed on hot wood, it was clear the house would never be more than a charred memory. Yet Sarah's gaze rested not on the ruin, but on the small figure beside her. Lotta sat calmly on the gravel, her coat matted with ash and sweat, but her eyes bright and alert. Around them, Luna the cat padded softly through the grass, Captain the parrot nuzzled against Sarah's shoulder under a makeshift sling, and even old Matilda clucked cheerfully in a cardboard box lined with hay. The entire, unlikely family stood together, whole and alive. A neighbor, Mr. Harlow, the mailman, shook his head, disbelief etched in every crease of his weathered face. "I've seen dogs do remarkable things," he said slowly, "but never anything like this." "You call that heroism?" Sarah's lips trembled. She pressed a hand to Lotta's shoulder, eyes dark with emotion. "If it weren't for her, none of us would be here," she said softly, voice barely above a whisper. "And I almost turned her away when I found her by the roadside." Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. A dozen neighbors had helped tug the last beams from the fire's grip, but none had dared venture inside once the flames took hold. Now they looked at Lotta as if she were some kind of miracle. Sarah repeated the words, tasting their truth on her tongue, "If it weren't for the dog, we would not be here. And I almost sent her away." Each syllable carried the weight of disbelief in her own actions, and a grateful reverence for the creature at her side. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, faintly, Sarah felt the soft pad of paws behind her. She turned just in time to see Lotta rise and step forward with deliberate grace. The dog lay her head gently across Sarah's knees, resting so lightly it was as though she floated on air. At that touch, warm, living, steadfast, Sarah felt a shiver of truth course through her. The despair and fear of the night before evaporated, replaced by a calm certainty. She knelt and stroked Lotta's ears, voice thick with wonder. "I thought it was over," she whispered into the hush. "I thought that was the end of our story." Lotta lifted her head and licked Sarah's hand as if to say, "This is only the beginning." The dog's eyes glimmered with promise, as if she knew the adventures yet to come, the bond yet to deepen. Neighbors watched in silent awe. Some dabbed at their eyes, others simply stared. Captain fluttered from Sarah's shoulder onto the dog's broad back, seeking warmth and safety. Luna wound between their legs, and old Matilda pecked gently at the ground nearby, as if marking each living heartbeat that Lotta had saved. Sarah rose, gathering the dog's head into her arms and pressing her cheek to Lotta's fur. The morning light caught the sheen of tears on her face. "You saved us all," she murmured. "You saved me." Lotta leaned into the embrace, tail sweeping the gravel in a soft rhythm that felt like the pulse of life itself. Around them, the first birds began to sing, unaware of the night's horrors, celebrating a new dawn that had been granted not by chance, but by the courage of a single, remarkable dog. And as neighbors slowly drifted away, some returning to their homes, others lingering to offer help or simply to bear witness, Sarah felt Lotta's warmth cradled against her heart. The ruins behind them signified an end, but in that quiet morning light, with Lotta's head upon her knees, Sarah knew without doubt that their story was just beginning. The first time Sarah saw Lotta, she was hunched at the edge of the gravel shoulder, trembling like an autumn leaf caught in a sudden gust. It had been a late afternoon drive home from town, the sun dipping behind the distant hills and painting the fields in gold. Sarah slowed when she spotted the dog's gaunt frame and wild eyes, half hidden in the brambles. She remembered how the dog had lifted her head, locked eyes with Sarah's, and held that look, steady, imploring, as if she knew exactly what was coming. Now, on this clear morning after the fire, Sarah watched Lotta pad across the dew-kissed grass, each step confident despite the singed patches along her flank. The same golden-brown eyes that had first pleaded for rescue now shone with an almost luminous calm. Sarah drew in a breath, astonished by how little Lotta had changed in spirit, despite all she had endured. It wasn't just coincidence, Sarah realized. The fire, the rescues, the miraculous series of events, it had been written long before that first meeting. Lotta had chosen Sarah as surely as Sarah had scooped her up that day, blanket in hand and hope in her heart. As the sun rose higher, painting the sky in pastel hues, Sarah guided Lotta toward the remains of the farmhouse. The blackened timbers stood like silent sentinels, bearing witness to the night's fury. Sarah knelt beside the charred front steps, running her fingers over the brittle wood. Embers still glowed faintly in the rubble, small reminders of the inferno's power, and, paradoxically, of its limits. She looked down at Lotta, whose head rested against Sarah's thigh. The dog's breath was steady, the rhythm as sure as a heartbeat in the quiet dawn. Sarah thought back to the ones Lotta had saved: Luna the cat, carried gently in her jaws; Captain the parrot, rescued from a blistering cage; Matilda the old hen, once forgotten and then returned to life. And then there was Lotta herself, dragged at the brink of collapse, only to lift her head and press forward one more time. Sarah closed her eyes, recalling the taste of smoke in her throat, the roar of flames around them, and the way each rescue had felt like a gift from some deeper place. It had all led to this moment, a moment that stretched beyond the charred remains into something timeless. She remembered kneeling that first night, heart hammering, as Lotta yanked her by the sleeve. She had thought the dog was merely nervous, until the crackle of fire announced the danger hidden behind the wall. In that instant, Sarah had understood that Lotta knew things beyond human perception: shadows shifting in the darkness, heat before it flared, life hanging by a thread. And now, after the final rescue, Sarah found herself facing an even greater revelation: she could not be who she had been before. She had witnessed the impossible, felt the bond between human and animal deepen into something sacred. The world, once a place of ordinary routine, had opened to hidden wonders, miracles born of instinct, loyalty, and an almost divine wisdom. Sarah knelt and took Lotta's paw in her hand. The pad was still warm from sleep and exertion, calloused but tender under her fingers. She looked into the dog's eyes, and saw reflected there not just a single cast rescue, but something infinite and profound, a bridge between species, a testament to the power of belief. "I don't believe any of this could happen," Sarah whispered, lips trembling. "But it did. You saved more than just our home. You brought back my faith in miracles." She drew Lotta close, chest pressing to chest, and spoke into the soft fur at the back of the dog's neck. "I can't be the same person I was before," she admitted. "Because of you, I know now that wonder isn't a fairy tale, it's real, and it lives in eyes that see beyond fear." Sarah rose, brushing a streak of ash from her jeans. Lotta stood with her, tail sweeping gently against the gravel. Together, they faced the quiet after the storm, a landscape of ruin and renewal, where hope had been forged in fire. Sarah reached out and curled her fingers through Lotta's collar, feeling the dog's steady pulse beneath the leather. She drew one deep, steadying breath of the cool morning air, tasting the smoke of memory and the promise of something new. The world would press on, neighbors would clean up, insurance assessors would measure loss, life would resume its familiar patterns, but Sarah knew she and Lotta had been changed forever. With a soft sigh, she leaned down to whisper her final truth into Lotta's ear: "If someone had told me any of this, I would never have believed it. But I held your paw in my hand. And I know, it's true." They walked away from the blackened husk of the farmhouse, side by side, toward a sunrise that seemed to blaze with possibility. Behind them, the ruins told a story of loss and survival. Ahead, the day held hidden miracles waiting to be seen. If you also believe that animals feel more than we can imagine, write in the comments: "Nature is wiser than us."